Hello, everyone. I hope we are all well. I am so excited for today's live, but before I go any further, I want to invite our guest to make sure that I have her on. Zulaikha, if you are here, please grace me with your invite so that we can kick this off. Once again, thank you for joining us and happy Youth Day to everybody in South Africa. To those who are curious to find out what Youth Day is, please stay tuned in because that is exactly what we will be talking about. I feel like it is so relevant to what is happening in the world today with regards to the Black Lives Matter movement. So please stay tuned and find out a little more about, South African history and what the youth did back in 1976. I'm just waiting on Zulaikha to send me a request and we can kick this off. Zulaikha, if you are here, please send me the request. I'm trying on my side to do so as well. Oh, there she is. Fantastic.
Hello to everyone in France. I see people from France are coming in. I see Philippines in the house. Hi, Danielle from the Philippines. I see we have Venezuela. Hi. How are you? Okay, wait.
Okay, I'm back. How are you?
Okay. I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I am fantastic. Happy Youth Day.
Happy Youth Day to you too.
Thank you so much. I'm trying to pin my comment before I get in trouble. And then we can kick this off. Okay, fantastic. I'm so happy to see you. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. I'm well. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. I'm just gonna, give a brief introduction to people who are watching, who are wondering who you are. To everyone, this is Zulaikha Patel. She is from South Africa. She's a young activist who came on the rise when she was only 13 years old. Continuing to just be a voice for the youth. I remember seeing you and looking at your age now, and you're 17 years old. And I was like, how old was she when she led a whole protest in a school? I mean, the bravery that you must have had, back then. For those who don't know, Zulaikha went to a school in Pretoria. I don't know if you still go there.
I'm in my matric year currently.
Okay, well, congratulations. And I know it must be so tough during this time. But she went to a girls' school in Pretoria where Black girls were not allowed to wear their hair as naturally as it grows out. They were told to tame their hair, if that's the right word. And they all stood up and said, no, we're Black. This is our hair. This is how it grows, and we want it to be that way. You challenged a system, and so that's why I'm so happy to have here today, specifically on Youth Day, to speak about the importance of the youth during this time and the importance of the youth to use our voices, with all these socio-political issues that are happening in the world. Why is it important to have the youth here? But before we delve in, or do you have something to say?
Yes, it's so important for young people to use their voices and for us to be at the forefront of socio-political spaces, because these are the same spaces that define what spaces that work towards creating an all-inclusive future. And ultimately, young people cannot have their futures determined by those that won't be part of them. So we have to be at the forefront of designing our future, because ultimately we are the ones that are going to inherit and occupy those futures. So it is so important for us to define and design the kind of future that we want to inherit and occupy.
Absolutely. You said it very well. Tzi said it as well when he led the protest back in 1976. He said, I'm not going to say it word for word, but I think in his words, he said along the lines of, if they do not speak out as the youth of 1976, they fear that the future, their children and their children's children might still be going through what they're going through. And I don't know, Zulaikha, but I see parallels with what's happening in the world today and what happened, 1976. I mean, we've had so many protests in South Africa. I mean, we've had the Sharpeville massacres. Those were protests. We have had, the Soweto uprising in 1976 of, Black people fighting oppression, fighting systems that were designed to oppress us. But then fast forward to 44 years later, to 60 plus years later, we still see Black people out in the streets protesting the same thing that our grandparents were protesting for. And it makes me wonder, for how long must we protest? For how long must we wait for people to catch up and realize that, Black people are human beings who are super deserving as well to be recognized as human? And, it's a little bit upsetting to realize that my grandchildren as well might have to protest in the streets just to be heard. But I want to go on a little further and ask you, Zulaikha, what does Youth Day mean to you? When you think about Youth Day, like what comes to mind?
For me, it serves as a reminder. It serves as a reminder that there was a dream that the class of 1976 had for what education should be, that education, quality education should be something that everyone can access without having to put their mental health or their dignity aside, and it serves as a reminder that they've left a baton for young people to take on, because for as long as quality education remains a thing that is only afforded to a minority class, then we still have a problem, and we know that we still have something to fight for. And for as long as accessing a quality education comes at the cost of the mental health and dignity of a Black child, then we know that we have to take on that baton at all costs necessary.
Absolutely, I agree. That's what I think of. When I think 1976 and the youth, I think about how they risked their lives, first of all. I think they knew in that moment that we're actually not doing this for ourselves. And maybe it might be too late for us as it was, because they got shot in the street while peacefully protesting, but they were doing it for us to sort of, pass on this baton. Like you said, I put up a post this morning where I said, it is now our responsibility as today's youth to make sure that the youth of 1976 didn't die in vain. They meant for us to pick up that baton and live the life that they could only, dream of. And it should motivate us as the youth. It should motivate us as the young people to make sure that we use our voices and we use every platform that we have to speak about, these social issues that are happening in the world today. And so that's what Youth Day means to me. It means we have this huge responsibility that we must at all costs carry on, because they ran the mile. They ran and they crawled so that we could fly, is how I look at it. And so I hope that when we celebrate Youth Day, when you take that photo at your graduation, when you kneel down, getting your degree, and you take that photo, think in that moment of how it would not have been possible for you to be there if it was not for the youth of 1976 and the uprising. But I want to say this as well. Somebody asked me a question earlier on, I think it must have been a few days ago in an interview. They said to me, do you think that the youth today, what kind of issues are the youth today facing that are different from the youth of 1976? Do we still have our own issues to deal with? And I said, absolutely. Yes, we do.
Yes,
we do.
Yes.
They started the fight that we now must finish, because in as much as the law has changed, a lot of things still haven't changed. If you look at South Africa today, if you look at the Fees Must Fall protest, who does it impact the most? I was personally one of the people who were, affected by the rise and increase of the fees happening in South Africa, because I am Black, because my parents never had an opportunity to build, that wealth and that future for me. And it's not only me, but it's the truth of every Black South African child. In as much as we have this education that the youth of 1976 fought for, we cannot afford it, and that is the reality of things.
Yeah.
So what do you think are some of the issues that the youth is facing today?
I think the biggest issue that we are facing today as 21st century young people, because we speak of social media being our friend, and truly social media is our friend when it comes to furthering certain causes. And now with the pandemic has come online education. And now as a society, in terms of us in South Africa, we weren't really prepared for online learning because we're one of the countries with the highest data costs. So that means that even online, only a certain class of people can afford to be online, can afford such platforms such as these that are online. So one of the biggest issues that we face is the data issue. Data prices are so high. And I think what this pandemic has highlighted is that data, it should be an essential right, because that's how you're meant to keep in contact with people. That's how you stay connected. That's how you keep informed, because everything has just transformed to being online. And that's your education ultimately today is something that is going on online.
Yeah, absolutely. I think really what you're trying to highlight with what you're saying is we can see the line so clearly and it's so visible, you know, between the advantaged and the disadvantaged. I was actually having a conversation with my mother. She's a school principal in a village, and I was having a conversation with her to say what's happening, like what's happening in schools there, because I know we're doing e-learning now, you know, people are online. I speak to a lot of people who come from different places. You know, I know people who have children who are doing online classes right now, and then I know my mom whose children at school aren't doing anything right now because they don't have the access to the internet, they don't have access to computers. And so I think these are the realities that we're facing today, because in as much as the laws have changed and as much as now we are allowed and have the freedom to have this education, there's still so much more that is, you know, pulling us back. And another thing that I mentioned that the youth is facing today is, in as much as we do have this education, look at how many unemployed graduates we have. That is the reality. We are in it. You can graduate, but how many people are now sitting at home on top of their degrees, on top of their masters and their everything that they fought to have today? We're still looking at a huge unemployment issue. So I think these are issues that we have, that we still have to deal with in South Africa today. And so, yeah.
And another big issue that I must include is that as much as we have this education now, we must understand that anti-blackness and racism exists within the pages of the textbooks as well, because we're not seeing enough of ourselves reflected and enough of our culture reflected within the pages of education. We're not learning enough about women. It's fair enough to empower the girl child, like with the philosophy of bring up the girl child. But if the girl child does not see herself reflected within the pages of textbooks, then we're not moving forward. We're not, you know.
I absolutely agree. It's so important. It's things that we don't think about. You know, when you do open that textbook, what do you see? What does it say about women? What does it say about women and their rights? Now that you've spoke about women, I want to tap into that a little, because I know that you advocate for, you know, the safety of women as well, gender equality. And we know right now, not even right now actually, because I'm not going to pretend like it's something that's happening only now. It's something that happens every day in South Africa. Women's lives are at risk. We can't go buy bread. You can't go to the post office to send stuff.
Even within your own
our own homes. In your own home. And I was saying, when I look at South Africa, it's like we have this pattern where every year we have a woman who's killed. I mean, we had Garabo. That happened. The whole country stood up. There was an uproar. And we thought, okay, maybe now we might just be listened to. And then it went down again. And then more women kept dying. And then we had Uyinene. And then the country again went crazy. And then it went quiet again. And then other women kept on dying. And now we have Tsegofato. Again, we are screaming from the top of our voices, and it's like we've protested, we've petitioned, we have raised money, we have done all that we can. It's obviously not enough. And for how long, you know, must women die in South Africa in order for people to realize how serious it is and how much needs to change. So why do you feel it's so important for the youth and for you? Because I know you specifically do this. Why do you feel it's so important to use your platform and your voice to highlight the issues that face the women of South Africa?
Okay, so two of my biggest problems is that even within education itself, when, for example, honestly, in these quality and prestigious schools, racism is one issue. And then when you look at same-sex schools, there's still another culture that's being perpetuated there. And I speak from personal experience, having been in an all-girls school. When I initially walked through those gates, I had the thought that this was going to be the most empowering environment I've ever walked into. Yet it was the opposite. One thing that was perpetuated like over and over and over again was the culture of shame. We must cover up, we must wear shame, it's our fault. It's as if you were taught that it is a sin for you to be born female. And another thing that was perpetuated was that we were taught to view ourselves as objects that need to be polished for men to come and select. And one thing that happens in boys' schools as well is that the culture of toxic masculinity is spoon-fed. It's spoon-fed, and they don't have enough of the conversations around gender-based violence and femicide. It's looked at as if it's addressing women's rights and gender equality is a responsibility of women only. Women's rights are a separate agenda from human rights, and that's not something that involves them. And if we don't put that culture to an end, then we're going to continue to move backwards. We're going to continue to have more and more girls every single year become a hashtag and become another phrase, justice for, and we're going to move backwards. We're not going to move forward if we do not address that culture taking place within these schools. What needs to happen is within girls' schools, we need to have programs that are implemented into the everyday lives of girls, where they are taught to view themselves as equals. We are empowered with leadership skills, and we are taught things such as seeing ourselves as equals, and also that it is never the fault of a rape victim. It's never your fault, and clothing is not consent, and we are empowered with such things. And within boys' schools, there needs to be programs put in place where they are taught about essentially what are women's rights and why it's so important for them to defend women's rights. Because as humans, if we haven't, and as a society, if we haven't achieved basic rights for the majority being women, then we have not achieved the essential agenda of human rights. And if we cannot put these programs in place and put an end to such culture within these schools, then we are going to continue to produce adults who mainly are women with insecurity problems and view themselves as objects. Then we're going to continue to produce male adults who see women as possessions and do not say anything in such situations. I was so appalled after finding out the news of Zulaikha Patel on Twitter and social media, and seeing the fact that on the same day, not as many men were outraged by her murder, but were tweeting about PS5 on the day. So we really need to bring these issues into light in boys' schools as well, because even for the past 4 years, whenever we would bring up topics around femicide in class, we would be immediately shut down, and it was looked at, oh no, ladies, you're being overly political. And it's like, but this is an issue that affects us as girls. So why aren't we speaking up about this, So we need to put in place such programs within schools, because if we don't, we're going to move backwards. And it also goes back to what you said when you won Miss Essay, when you said that we need to urge perpetrators to do better and be better. We place too much responsibility on women. We ask women, what can you do? This is what you can do. Here are prevention tips. But we never go back to men and say, if men were to sit together right now and reflect and say, last year when the country was outraged by the death of Uyinene, what did you do as a man to change your perception of women? What did you change about your attitude? What conversations were you having when you were together with your male friends? Were you calling out other men who are to be held accountable for certain things? We're not holding men accountable enough for perpetuating such things and this culture and behavior. And that's one thing that needs to change. We need to change the program within schools. We need to include this in the program within schools so that we produce responsible adults, and we need to hold more men accountable for their behavior, actions, and perceptions.
Yeah, absolutely. You said a mouthful that I really do agree with, because I feel like we are not holding them accountable enough. They're not holding themselves accountable enough, because
Yes.
here's as much as they don't do that. Here's an example. There was a hashtag not all men trending on Twitter, and I was like, when I looked at it, I was like, isn't this the time? Isn't this the time where you are supposed to now reflect at yourselves and look within and say, you know, women are dying and we are killing these women, and we need to hold people accountable. And a woman 8 months pregnant, stabbed and hung on a tree. And we have men still saying not all men, you know, are responsible for this, and putting out hashtags. And like you said, tweeting about a PlayStation 5, which for them was much more important than the lives lost of women. And yes, you are absolutely right. Just like racism, patriarchy is an issue. It is found within our constitutions. It is found in the books. It's just there because the world that we live in was built both on racism and patriarchy, you know, just to, it's not protective enough of women, not only in South Africa, actually, but all across the world. Women are suffering and women are dying. And it's like, we always have to come under. And a lot of things need to change. A lot of things absolutely need to be done. And it goes way beyond our voices, but, you know, people must actually listen.
Yes.
I want you to now give me an example of a moment, like whenever, where you felt like voices and protesting have changed, you know, South Africa or in the world. What was one instant where using our voices, you know, changed the world or South Africa? I'll give you an example and then you can go after me. I was actually a part of the Fees Must Fall protest, and I was there, I was within, because it affected me personally, it affected a lot of South African students, and we were like, no, you cannot raise, we actually cannot afford fees right now. We can't afford our tuition. And so, you know, adding on to it is going to make it even worse. I remember we protested in the sun every day, you know, trying to be heard. And, you know, surely there was a change. Something happened. They did not increase the fees on that year. They were like, okay, you know what, you're right, we're listening. In as much as some people were calling for free education, which is something we will see if it will ever happen. But, you know, it takes a series of events and protests in order for people to be heard. But in that year, when I was a part of the protest, a change did happen because we used our voices. What is an instance for you where you used your voice, or you saw people using their voices and change indeed happened?
Okay, so when I first heard of Fees Must Fall, I was in grade 7. And that for me completely changed my perspective, where I was like, here are young people using their voices. I, as a young person, I have a voice and I am in the majority. So it is my responsibility to ensure that I use my voice to change society, and I use my voice to define the type of future that I want to see and live in. And so for me, it was in 2016 when we protested against institutionalized racism within school. And what happened was, we first protested, our first protest was on the 26th of August, where we came in all black and African head wraps, and we said that the all black symbolizes our unity, and it symbolizes us resisting the system, you know. And then on the 27th, that's when we decided to take it a step further, and then we held a small march in the school, and then that's where we were threatened with arrest. And for me, that just showed that there's still so much that needs to be done within the country, and the only people that are left to do it are young people, because we are in the majority and the future is ours to inherit. So that moment for me really changed everything, because at the time when I was shouting arrest us, for me it was a thing of, I said that I don't want to sit 10 years down the line and see another generation of young Black girls walk into the doors of the school and walk the same corridors that I walked and be psychologically and physically abused by the system of institutionalized racism. So it's now or never.
Absolutely. Okay, before we go any further, I almost even forgot to ask this because I was so excited to have this conversation. But if you guys have any questions for Zulaikha and I, please drop them on the question box. It's always easier if you put it in that question box because I'm able to see it and we will be answering those questions for you. And another thing I want to remind you guys about is that you can actually take action as a citizen and register to be a global citizen. We spoke a lot about gender-based violence as well, and there's a place where you can actually pledge a global citizen to protect vulnerable women and to fight for their rights. I will actually provide you guys with a link that we will also put on the Miss Universe stories after we're done with this live. You can go there and you will find a link that will send you to the Global Citizen website where you can actually make a change, because it's one thing to speak, it's actually one thing to actually take action and be a part of the change that we actually want to see in the world. So please do that. I don't know, in the comments, they might drop the link in there as well, but I will make sure to put the link in after. So please send in the questions. We will get back to you and answer those questions before we end this live. I want to speak about institutionalized racism, like you said. Have you seen the stories that have been going around about South African schools?
Yes.
Personally, I've never been affected by that, in a sense that I never went to a mixed school where, you know, there were, you know, Black, white, Indian and colored people. I went to an all-Black school because I grew up in the Eastern Cape in a village. So when these things came out, it was very, I don't want to say it wasn't shocking. It wasn't shocking at all, because, you know, we know the truth of today. We know that, you know, the world is still a racist place. We know that South Africa still is. And as much as we have come so far, we have. I never ever want to say South Africa hasn't come far. I will never ever say that people didn't fight for the freedoms that we had today, because if they didn't, you and I would not be here today. We wouldn't be here today. And so I really want to take my hat off to the people who fought for us to be here. And I want to recognize in this moment that South Africa has come so far. But at the same time, I also want to say we still have a long way to go. And we've seen it in the stories. Like, when I saw those stories and Black students coming up and saying, these are the things that happened to us, and they were different to the things that happened to the white students in the school, it was so mind-blowing to me to think that in 2020, because what I was watching is these were former students coming up to say, listen, this school is racist. It was when I was there. And then to have new people who are still there even today saying it is still a racist institution within South Africa, to me is mind-blowing. And those people need to be called out as well. And I want to say I'm so proud of, you know, the students who stood up, who stepped up and used their voices, because by using their voices, they're now, you know, opening an opportunity for other students who are
more and more people to open up.
And to actually say, you know what, this is wrong, a change needs to happen within our schools, but not only on schools, but in South Africa as well, and corporate spaces everywhere. I remember I was actually at an interview yesterday once again, and people were asking, and someone asked me, you grew up in the Eastern Cape where it was a majority of Black people, and then I moved to Cape Town for my university, and they asked me, what were the differences that you noticed between where you grew up and being in Cape Town, of which Cape Town is known to be, you know, one of the more racist parts of South Africa? And they asked me, how was that change? And I told them that I think for the first time, I felt that I was Black when I was in Cape Town. I felt it. I'd never really felt it before when I was back home in the Eastern Cape, again, because I was surrounded by Black people. Until I got to Cape Town, the things that I'd read about, the things that I'd seen on TV were actually, you know, happening in front of me now, where, you know, I would be at school and how white students were treated as opposed to how Black students were treated was not the same. How, when I was applying for a job after I graduated, I was trying to get an internship, and people would say to me, Sissy, you will not work in Cape Town. Don't even try it. Apply somewhere else and not in Cape Town. And I would ask, what do you mean? And they would be like, because you're black, it's difficult for you to get a job in Cape Town. And I decided, you know what, I'm actually going to delve into this and see what it's about. And I would go into every website of a lot of agencies in Cape Town. And there it is. In their websites, you'd see it, you know, a lot of maybe 90% of the staff is white people, and you would have only 2 black people in the company who probably are the receptionist. And, you know, there's not a lot of representation and inclusion, not only in schools, but in the workplaces. And for me, people ask, then what are we supposed to do, you know, to help these situations? And once again, it's calling people out. It's one thing to put out a tweet. It's one thing to say, as an organization, we don't stand for racism, but it's another thing to actually change it. If you are sitting in that boardroom as a white person, or as a person who's not black, put up a black person who you feel is deserving for that post.
Exactly.
Put that person up to say, there's actually one person I know who is qualified for this job. This person is black. Why don't you hire that person instead of this person? It's the same thing that we're speaking about when we say men need to hold people accountable. That's what we need for people who are not affected to actually start taking action. Because just because it doesn't affect you doesn't mean it's not doesn't mean it's not real. So, I'm getting thirsty.
And you know, there's one thing that I've actually been saying is that today in our society, talking and bringing up racism and fighting for racism isn't just a black responsibility. No. We need more of those that are not affected to come and show up in the conversation, to come up and show up and fight as well, because it's an issue of a violation of human rights for a group of people. So you, as someone who's not affected, what are you doing to ensure that people are don't have their rights continue to be violated? And I remember in school, we'd have conversations about race, and you'd hear a vast number of white girls saying, oh no, it wasn't our fault. We weren't there. But the issue is that you benefit from what was created when you weren't there. So what are you doing about that? What are you saying when you see people being excluded? What are you saying? So racism, addressing racism and fighting against racism is not just a black responsibility. More white people need to show up to the party as well.
Absolutely.
And for me, one of the issues that I've always highlighted each time I speak about race on any platform is that we are not going to get anywhere as a country if we don't realize and come to terms with the fact that many of these institutions, which are former white, former Model C institutions, in that foundation of the institution, the same systems of apartheid are still entrenched within that. And so you cannot possibly build anything inclusive and progressive on top of those bricks if those bricks are still there. Everything will continue to collapse downwards. And so if we don't address the fact that we need new systems in these schools, complete new systems, then we're not going to go anywhere at all. And to address the issue of hair policies, because that's one of the symptoms that comes up of the entire system. You cannot say that there won't be discrimination if there's still a policy. To completely root out all forms of hair discrimination towards Black African hair, you need to eradicate the policy as a whole, because who gets to be the person that sits and decides how hair should be maintained, how hair should be styled, what type of hair texture should be seen as applicable for this sort of institution? In creating the policy, you already ultimately bring forth discrimination, and there will always be discrimination if there's still a policy, because obviously people are going to be left out in the drafting of that policy. So the only way to ensure that there won't be hair discrimination is to completely eradicate the policy.
Absolutely. So what we are saying is dismantle dismantle everything that we know, dismantle all the systems and build new ones, because what you cannot do is to put a band-aid on top of a wound before you can clean it, because what
Yes.
happens is that that wound becomes infectious and it starts rotting as time goes by, and that's why things are falling apart, because that's what we are doing. We are putting a band-aid on top of a system that is rotten deep on the inside, and so we cannot heal and we cannot move forward until we dismantle all of the systems and build new ones that are more inclusive, to a new inclusive South Africa and to a new inclusive world, for that matter.
Yeah.
Absolutely, I will agree. I want to go to the questions now, because I don't want people to feel like we are... Oh, somebody said, how do we get involved? I think, for one, like I said, I'm going to put on information about Global Citizen, on how you can become a Global Citizen, how you can sign petitions, how you can pledge, and how you can actually use your voice as the youth to speak about things that matter, how you can continuously educate people around you about these issues. Because if we are in spaces and we don't continue to educate each other, then we are completely failing each other. And so I think that's how you can get involved. Watch the Miss Universe slides and watch mine as well. I will be sharing information about Global Citizen and how you can get involved. So yeah, how do men get involved? Like we said, I think you might as well tell them again, Zulaikha, on how they should hold each other accountable. I think he might have missed that.
How men get involved. Firstly, it's not enough that you say not all men. The culture is, you are still taught a specific culture when growing up. What conversations are you having with your sons? What conversations are you having with your male friends? Who are you calling out? Men can get involved by actually protesting with women when women protest, speaking up on women's rights, the importance of women's rights, because women's rights are human rights, and holding each other accountable and having the right conversations with your sons, because boys will not be boys. You need to have the right conversations with your sons that women are not possessions.
Absolutely. And another thing I want to add on is that men need to believe women, first of all, when they say they've been wronged. Believe women. Don't say, okay, but okay, but what did she do though? Okay, but what? No, the first instinct, you should believe the person and stand by them when they say that this happened. And again, hold people accountable. So that's how men can get involved. Like Zulaikha said, it's not a woman issue only. It's everyone.
It's a humanity issue.
Yeah,
for everyone.
Okay, here's a question for you, Zulaikha. How did you navigate the racism you experienced from your white peers?
Okay, so what I did was I had conversations with them. I literally had conversations with them. I remember a girl said the N-word, and then I called her out and I said, you can't say that. You cannot say that. You cannot say that at all. And then she asked me why. And I was like, because this word is a symbol of my oppression as a Black person, and it is derogatory. And I had conversations with them, because also what we need to understand is that racism is also taught within these homes, within their families. It's something that is taught, So we need to encourage conversations with them whereby we actually push them to a point whereby we push uncomfortable conversations, and they're ultimately forced to unlearn what they've been taught. And they need to understand. And I've always said to my white friends, understand and own your white privilege. Understand it. That's the only way that you and I can have more conversations, is if you understand where you lie in society. Having conversations with them, uncomfortable conversations.
Absolutely. That is a fantastic answer. And absolutely, speaking on white privilege and not denying that you have it is the first start of how you can actually get involved. Let me see if we have another question. I'm actually not wearing my contacts, Zulaikha. Do you know that is such a huge mistake? That is a huge mistake. Okay, here's another one. Somebody says, how do you feel about what is happening in America? And I'm guessing that's the Black Lives Matter protests happening at the moment. I mean, like I said, I went to join one of the protests. I think it was last week when I went. And like I said, it's like parallels of what's been happening in South Africa for a very long time. That's how I feel. I just feel like it's history repeating itself. I just feel like the more things change, the more things stay the same. And yeah, that's how I feel.
And go backwards as well.
Yeah.
For me, how I feel, it's not just an American issue. It's not an American issue. I'm affected by police brutality as well in South Africa as a Black person. And so I've had conversations with my Black friends, and I've said that we need to understand that this is not just an American issue. This is an issue that we are facing in South Africa as well. As much as we are outraged by the murder of George Floyd, we need to be just as outraged by the murder of Collins Khoza as well, and the many names, that the unsung names of our South African brothers and sisters who have been murdered as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so it's not just an American issue. That's literally how I feel. It's an issue that I'm affected by here as well.
I think it's an issue that every Black person in the world is affected by. Because by virtue of being Black, you are struggling wherever you are in the world. Because like I said, I feel like every system in the world has been built on the backs of Black people and oppressing Black people. So yeah, I guess that's how we feel about what's happening. That's why we're so vocal about it as well, is because we didn't really look at it as it's only happening in America. It's a reality for everyone.
It's a reality.
It's a reality
and
across the world. So
and we're always getting profiled in any space that we walk into. We're profiled because of the color of our skin. We're profiled because of the texture of our hair.
Yeah. Okay. Most of the questions I feel we've answered. Okay, this one is for you again. Someone says, Zulaikha, what is your next protest, I think, and how can we be supportive of the movement? I think they just want to know what you stand for and how they can be a part of it.
Okay, what currently right now, what I've been doing is I've been speaking to as many of my fellow matric peers and speaking about what we're facing in our institutions and how everyone can support us is literally stand by pupils, stand by learners, support us, hear us out, give us platforms to speak, you know, bring young people to the table, listen to young people. Actually, when young people speak, listen to us, hear us out, you know.
Absolutely. There we go. Let's see if we have another one. It's actually a lot. Some seem so small that I can't even see. I know. This is a difficult one to answer because someone says, what do you believe is the solution we need to resolve issues of racism? It's been going on for centuries. We are tired. We're tired too. I'm tired too. And honestly,
we're all tired.
It's such a difficult one to answer because these are questions that I have myself, because like I said, we've protested, we have signed petitions, we have done everything, but how do we get to the root of the problem and how do we resolve this? And for me, I wish, you know, when I speak, I hope that the youth is listening, not just Black people, but white people as well.
Yes.
Here's why I say this, Zulaikha. Whenever we speak about June 16, it feels like a Black people thing. But it's not. It's not a Black people thing. It's where everyone in South Africa should be listening. And here's why I say this. We always say the future is in the hands of the youth. And when we say the youth, we don't only mean the Black youth, but we mean white, colored, Indian, everyone. And to everyone, colored is actually allowed in South Africa. To everyone else who's probably watching is thinking, what did she just say, colored? No, it's actually a group of people in South Africa. So it's when we say the youth is the future, we're also speaking about them as well. And I want to go back to what you said about the conversations you have with your peers who say, we weren't there when apartheid was happening, and so why should we, you know, be responsible? As the youth, I think it's so important to pay attention, to listen, to try and understand where your country comes from, to try and understand your privilege, to understand how you can use your privilege to actually help what's happening at the moment. And so I'm throwing it to the youth right now to say, if your parents and grandparents couldn't listen to us, then maybe you can listen. Then maybe you can be the ones to change, you know, the issues of racism and to resolve it. And so, yeah, you know, I'm challenging the youth who's not Black to actually be attentive, to actually listen, because they actually might hold the key to, I don't know, maybe ending racism. We don't know.
Yeah, and for me, this
centuries.
For me, this one is really also I feel like as a young person in South Africa, I've gotten to a point whereby I'm no longer questioning the system only. I am now questioning those that have been in power as well, because you've been in power for decades, and what change have you brought? How have you included other people on the table, the decision-making table? Have you included the most marginalized people on that decision-making table to bring forth their demands and what change they want to see? What have you done as well in your position of power, you know? And so also the solution for me I'll always throw it back to young people and say, we need to bring young people to the table, because young people have always been the ones who have come forth and said, this is what we can do. We've always been creators and agents of change. So if you can bring young people to the table, then I definitely think that they will be changed. Because if you look on young people's social media platforms, you look at the young people that have come out in their schools with the racist allegations from their schools and the incidents of racism within their schools. You look at St. Anne's, Durban College, they've all brought forward a list of demands. And if you read through those demands properly, those demands state a clear change in definitely tearing down the entire system. Like, they definitely spark the building of a new system, you know? And truly, essentially, if we can bring young people to the table, I definitely think that we will see change in our society. Yeah, we really will.
I agree. Can't wait to see young people taking up positions of leadership and leading us to, you know, a new dawn in South Africa. It would be absolutely amazing to see. Someone is asking if can they join the live. I'm so sorry. I would love for you to join the live, but not today. Maybe another time. Let me see. Someone said, what are your thoughts on Black women being the front line in the protests? Let me tell you about women. Like, I'm not even shocked that is happening, because there's something extremely powerful that women bring to the table in general, which is why I don't understand why this killing of people who are so essential in the world. I mean, we look at the women of 1956 who marched to the Union buildings, who did all that they could so that I could be here today. This is not the first time that women have been at the front line of anything. Women are at the front lines everywhere. Let's take a look at the pandemic and what has been happening at the moment.
Women have been at the front line.
Midwives, nurses, you know, mothers taking care of children at home. These are women. They've always been in the front lines, whether it's in the boardroom, you know, whether it's work, whether it's at home. They are in the front lines taking care of their
simple things, as well as our communities as well.
Yeah.
Our communities are built on the backs of women.
Absolutely.
We see strong matriarchal figures in our communities. Yeah. So it's not something new that only now women have been in the front line of protests. Women have been in the front line of all movements of change since the beginning of time.
Absolutely.
You know, it's nothing new, nothing surprising.
Which is why you're asking us to stop killing us. Like, can you just stop? You know, it's not, I'm not surprised that they are there in the front lines of the protest. Like Zulaikha said, they've been there since the beginning of time, doing amazing things. And someone asked me if I can speak Spanish.
Communities themselves are built on the backs of women.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to take a few more questions because I'm worried, Zulaikha. What happens is Instagram cuts us out after a certain time. Yeah. So when we reach that hour, I need for us to have been done. So we have about 10 minutes left. So I think we'll take 2 more questions. Here's one. Do you think the feminism movement has made an impact in spaces where women of color exist? I know you are a strong Black feminist, Zulaikha. This is a burning question for you. Do you think feminism movement has been... Absolutely.
Yes, that is why you and I get to sit here as 2 two young Black women and have a conversation together is because we've been encouraged and we've been empowered to speak up. And one thing that I've always been told by multiple times I've always been told that feminism is foreign to African principle, and that's not true. That is not true. Multiple times, if you go back into ancient African history before colonization, communities were built on the backs of their queens.
Yeah.
Feminism has definitely made an impact in the spaces where women of color exist, because we are able to stand up and speak up today on our injustices. The fact that we are able to have conversations today and speak up, because we underestimate the power of speaking up. We underestimate it, and it is so powerful to speak up. It's definitely made such a massive impact because we are able to speak up today.
Yeah, I am personally a product of feminism. So I will speak for myself and say I'm where I am today. I stood in those stages and said what I said firmly and unapologetically because of that movement. And so absolutely it has helped. It has had such a huge impact on, women of color today. And yeah, yes, it has absolutely. Okay, I think we're going to take one more and then we're going to have our final words, Zulaikha, and then we can be done. Let's see what other questions we have. Oh, this is a good one. Do you think this is a fight not only for the Black community but for any minority in the world? Yes. First of all, I also want to say again, I always say this when I log on and I didn't say it this time, Happy Pride Month to everyone, member of the LGBTQI community. I remember when we started, when we came into this month, I was speaking on Youth Month, I was speaking on the Black Lives Matter movement, and I said, as we continue, I forgot even my own quote because I'm quoting myself. I said, as we continue to fight for human rights, may we remember the rights of the LGBTQIA plus community, because I feel like their rights have been dismissed for such a long time. You cannot speak on human rights and not speak about the rights of that community. You are wrong for doing that. And so, yes, absolutely, this fight does speak to that community, because it is a community whose rights have been dismissed for such a long time, and their rights are still being dismissed today, and we say no to that.
And dignity.
And we say absolutely no. We fight with them, we are with them, and we stand with them. So yes, absolutely. When we speak of representation, when we speak of inclusion, we are speaking to that community as well. So yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I absolutely agree as well. I mean, you've worded it perfectly. Like, I would be repeating what you're saying. Definitely, the fight is for all those that are marginalized as well.
Yeah. So I hope that answers your question. That was the last one that we're taking, because we are, running out of time, and that makes me sad because I'm enjoying this conversation so much. Okay, Zulaikha, I want you to give me your final. What do you want to leave us with today? Just give me your final statement. Just wrapping up this whole conversation.
Okay. Firstly, the youth of 76 has left a baton. Today, we honor them, and we must understand a luta continua. The struggle continues. They've left a baton. And as young people, we have to. It is our responsibility. We must take that baton and run with it. We must run with it, not walk with it, run with it. Because the future is ours to inherit and occupy. And so we must do everything in our power to ensure that that future is one that is inclusive, one that is equal, one that is gender inclusive, one that is race inclusive as well. And we must ensure that in the future to come, young children do not have to abandon and disrupt their childhoods to become leaders of movements, to become activists, to fight injustices that we are currently fighting. So we have to do everything and all things possible to continue that fight. And also, don't stay silent. Don't stay silent. Silence is, you are just as guilty for being silent, And then just on the issue of speaking up as well, we as young people, we have to speak up. And when we speak up and we disrupt the system, it is equally our responsibility to recreate. We cannot disrupt the system if we're not prepared to recreate. So when we disrupt it, if we say we are disrupting systems that uphold colonial standards, we must be prepared to recreate systems that are Afrocentric and all-inclusive. So we have to recreate, and on top of that, bring young people to the table. To the corporates watching this, bring young people to the table. That's the only way things are going to change, is if you bring the creators and agents of change to the table.
Absolutely. Thank you. Ooh, goosies, literally goosebumps. Zulaikha, I absolutely loved doing this with you today, and I hope that we can do something like this again in the future. I hope that you continue.
Definitely.
I hope that you continue using your voice as loud as you can. Scream to the top of your voice until somebody listens. Light that torch and make sure that it lights other people's torches as well, and that they too can be inspired to step up and, you know, just to do the best of their abilities. There's nothing more that I will say that you haven't said yet. You know, the future is indeed in the hands of the youth. So give everything to the youth. Give them these opportunities, because they are the future. They know where we are headed. Give them the proper resources, and you can see amazing things that they can do. I mean, we saw it back in 1976.
Definitely.
We still see it again happening today. So thank you so much for joining Zulaikha and I, guys.
Actually, if there's one thing, I should add, is that we misinterpret change to be this massive thing. But honestly, it begins in your small. No act of resistance goes unnoticed. No act of resistance goes unnoticed. And so truly, it begins in your own community. Mobilize, have these conversations within your own community, and you'll see amazing things happen.
Absolutely. Yes, she said it. Start small. This actually brings me back to something. Someone asked me, when I said take up space, what did I mean? And I said to them, when I said take up space, literally, people usually think it's at a world stage, and people usually think it's about something massive, and it's not. You can take up space anywhere. You can take up space in your home. You can take up space in your classroom. You can take up space in corporate spaces, just wherever it is. The smallest that you can do it, because small pieces help out a bigger part of the struggle and of the fight. And so, you know, start today, start small, start growing, and start involving other people. So yeah, that's all from us. Thank you, Zulaikha, for being a part of this. Thanks to you guys for participating.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for your questions and your comments. This was absolutely beautiful. And lastly, I want to say again, Happy Youth Day, South Africa. I hope you take this time to reflect. I hope you take this time to plan. And I hope you take this time to pick up the baton that the youth of 1976 left us. Pick it up, run as fast as you can, and make sure that you fly. Thank you so much, Zulaikha. Bye, Queen.
Thank you so much.
Bye, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you.